Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. The Center for Public Affairs and Critical Theory at Shiv Nadar University has proposed a series of labour law reforms, including for the first time in India, a hire and fire policy. Given the Modi government's commitment to labour law reforms, these proposals could very well form the basis of what the government might do. With me to discuss just how far these proposals go and what their implications would be is the Director of the Centre, Dipankar Gupta, the Joint Managing Director of Hero Motocorp, Sunil Munjal, joining us hopefully soon, the former Secretary General of FICCI and one of India's top economists, Rajiv Kumar, and also joining us from Calcutta, the General Secretary of the All India Trade Union Congress, Gurudas Das Gupta. Dipankar Gupta, let's take up the different reforms you've suggested one by one so that it's easier for the audience to follow them. Now, most strikingly, you're advocating a form of hire and fire, but with certain very strict conditions. Explain this for the audience.
Well, the reform that we suggested should not be seen simply as a hire and fire. It does help companies to downsize, right size or whatever, but it is not as if all of this can be done without a cost. In our view, the biggest problem was the threshold of 100 plus and the 240 days. In other words,
for the audience, explain. 100 plus meant that the IDA, the Industrial Disputes Act, applied to any company that employs more than 100. You've done away with that.
Yeah,
and 240 was that you don't get full pay unless you have worked for continuous 240 days. Yes. You've done away with that.
But 240 days was equal to 1 year roughly. And the reason why 240 days was a problem was because if you didn't do 240 days, you were not entitled to compensation should you be retrenched. And if you were in a factory which had less than 100 workers, you could be hired and fired at will. Now, what we are saying is get rid of these thresholds. No threshold in terms of size, no threshold in terms of duration. What you have instead is that every worker is permanent until something goes wrong, and hopefully nothing will. Number two, if something should go wrong, the worker gets compensation, which includes DA, Provident Fund, the rest of it, including, shall I say, severance pay, which is very important.
But after you pay those costs, he can be sacked.
Yes.
And that's the big change. At the moment, regardless of what costs you may be prepared to pay, you can't sack a worker. You're making it possible, but with strict costs attached.
Yes, but you see, now what happens is this, that if the unit is 100 plus, only then workers have some security. But this, as you know, applies to only about 2% of the workforce.
Now you're giving security right across the board.
Security right across the board to everybody. So really speaking, this is not just hire and fire, it's hire and fire, but it also adds to industrial growth, development.
Absolutely. And it's let me put it like this, it's hire and fire, but it is also security for those while they're employed.
That's right.
And there is a certain measure of security for those who are fired because they have to be paid severance, they have to be paid PF, they have to be paid gratuity.
So if you want to run an industry, you have to plan things out well in advance.
Sunil Munjal, you're an industrialist. I'm going to first discuss with you what I call the hire and fire element, because that is the new novel feature, and also it is something that is most striking of all. As Dipankar Gupta puts it in that paper, dismissal is possible, but there is a cost to the management for doing so. Now, as someone who is a manager, are you prepared to accept the cost so that you can hire and fire? Or do you think that those costs, which are severance pay of 45 days salary for every year of work, as well as full gratuity and PF, would you say those costs are too much, or are they acceptable?
So let me first go back to the earlier comment where you started. I don't think industry has ever been asking for a hire and fire. Industry has always said the regulation in India is too rigid. It actually discourages new hire. And there is a dire need at this moment to increase employability and employment in India. And our current policy actually needs to be turned on its head to encourage more hiring, where we have such a large number of people. So industry runs with people. It doesn't want a free hire and fire. It wants conditional hire and the ability to be able to hire and let people go where the industry is not doing well. Yeah.
But then, just a moment, so that I understand you properly, are you suggesting by that answer that Dipankar Gupta is proposing something industry doesn't want? Or are you simply quibbling with the term hire and fire? Because you did say industry wants a policy where it can let people go when they don't want them. That is fire by any definition.
No, that's what I'm saying. Exactly the point I'm making. It doesn't want the freedom to hire and fire all the people all the time.
But nobody
industry is absolutely okay to do this with conditionality.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you? Dipankar Gupta pointed out that no one is suggesting, leave aside proposing, that you will hire and fire people all the time and all the people all the time at that. What is now being made possible under Dipankar Gupta's paper is that when industrialists want to let people go, particularly if they fall within the threshold of the IDA Act, they will now be able to do so, whereas previously they weren't able to do so. The only thing is that there's a cost to doing so. Are you happy with those costs?
That's what I'm saying. I'm actually agreeing with him. I'm not disagreeing with him. This is the point I'm making. That this is a gross misconception since many years that industry has been asking for a blind hire and fire. That has never been the case, actually.
Okay. Let me bring you in, Gurudas Das Gupta, because you speak as a trade unionist and I want to get your opinion. I know that trade unionists traditionally do not like any form of policy that permits workers to be laid off or fired, regardless of whether that happens with severance pay, PF and gratuity or not. But in this instance, what is also being proposed is a measure of security that is not available up till now. Dipankar Gupta is suggesting that regardless of the size of the company, all workers must be on the muster rolls with proper full-fledged appointment letters with full wages and benefits. Does that measure of security make the element of hire and fire more acceptable, or is it still unacceptable to you?
You know, hire and fire is not at all acceptable to us. Whatever my friend from the industry might have said, if you look at Gurgaon, just few miles away from Delhi, there is a number of factories who are working in a way the management likes. They throw out the people who don't need it without any compensation, and they recruit people at a very low wage. It is all going on. Therefore, the point is not that whether you like it or not, whether you don't like the word hire and fire, it is all going on in the country.
Can I interrupt?
But
can I interrupt, Mr. Das Gupta? You know, you talked about letting people go and firing them without compensation. That is not what Dipankar Gupta is proposing. He's talking about a severance pay of 45 days' salary for every year of work. Therefore, there is a very sizable severance pay that will be made available to those who are fired. On top of that, they will get their full gratuity and their full provident fund. Would that make it more acceptable?
The point is, gratuity and provident fund is all guaranteed by constitution.
But severance pay is not.
It is under law obligatory. Therefore,
but severance pay is the new thing.
They are not doing it because they are violating law.
What about severance pay? You're overlooking that.
I know in several states it is not being done. In rare cases it is done. When they fire the people, they don't pay the provident fund.
No.
Even they don't pay the gratuity also.
Okay.
I remember many cases, even in West Bengal, when gratuity has not been paid and the man has died on the street.
Okay. Let me bring you in at this point.
What but the compensation that Mr. Gupta is suggesting...
Let me stop you there for a moment. I'm going to come back to Dipankar Gupta. You're getting a mixture of very interesting views. Not full throttle support from Sunil Munjad, who's an industrialist, because as he pointed out, industry doesn't want a straight hire and fire policy. You're not by any means getting support from the trade unions, because even though you're offering severance pay for every time someone is fired, Mr. Gupta is not happy with it. Do you think you're going to fall between two stools? Opposition from the trade unions and lack of full throttle commitment from industrialists?
Well, you know what, it's like this, that it's very difficult for most people to overcome the constraints of the given. The fact of the matter is that we are so used to the preponderance of casual labor, informal labor, that we can't think of a world which is not quite like that. Look at all the factors that Mr. Das Gupta mentioned in Gurgaon or elsewhere. The preponderance of informal labor, you know, it spoils everything. 240 days, if you don't get 240 days, you're fired, you get nothing. There's no compensation at all. If a unit is below 100 workers, there again, you can easily fire a person with no compensation, which is why, as I was mentioning to you earlier, about 93% of our workforce is the informal sector. Today, in the organized sector, this is what Sunil should pay attention to. In the organized sector, the proportion of informal labor is growing by the day. It is over 60% now.
Can I pause you there? What you're really saying, first of all to Mr. Dasgupta, is that you have taken a whole set of measures that make life and add security for those who are in the informal sector. You're cutting down on what you call the informalization of labor, and that is the plus side. And that plus side should be weighed in the balance when he looks at what he considers the negative, which is the possibility of firing. But even that possibility comes with strict conditions.
Yeah,
you
but
therefore
today,
want Guru Das Dasgupta to look at it in the round.
I'd like Mr. Dasgupta and Mr. Munjal to consider this. Today, you can fire a worker anytime you want to without paying any compensation. It's a a kind of policy where it is pain-free. If you have hired labor, contract labor, in fact, we have gone and talked about contract labor, there are no rules at all that are being obeyed. So the worker, in fact, is being served very badly today under the current dispensation. What we are proposing is the worker gets permanence, and the entrepreneur too has the room and the space to right size, downsize, or whatever.
Okay. Before I go to Sunil Munjal, let me put that to you first, Guru Das Dasgupta. This is a package altogether. On the one hand, is the capacity to fire regardless of the size of the company, provided severance is paid along with gratuity and provident fund. On the other side is a whole lot of rules making for full employment regardless of how many days you worked, ending informalization of labor, limiting the number of people who can be hired for non-intrinsic purposes, limiting the amount of contract labor. When you see it as a package, are you happy to accept it?
I think industry would be okay to accept the whole package. The fear, however, is that very often these things get cherry-picked. Part of it gets done, part does not. And if the flexibility does not improve or inflexibility remains, you will actually defeat the entire purpose. And to both my friends on the other end, by the way, Gurgaon is an area which pays amongst the higher salaries in India, not just in the region.
But let's come off
this issue, and you cannot fire anybody at will. Just
can I
I want
come back?
to make two corrections. You cannot fire people at will.
No,
okay,
not at the moment.
Your comment.
Please.
I think industry would be okay. I think industry would be okay to be able to pay compensation to people who lose their jobs. And I think there is a role also for government and the unions to pre-train people once they lose their jobs. So because there are new opportunities coming up, new systems, new products, new technologies coming in, we need to train people for that as well.
Can I stop you? Because can I put something to Sunil Munjal? One of the things that is also stipulated.
I'm going to have to leave, Karan, so I need to.
You need to leave.
Go ahead.
You've only just joined us. Alongside the element of hire and fire are certain limitations being proposed on the number of people who can be hired by firms for incidental jobs which are not intrinsic to the firm through a contractor. And that is to be limited to just 5%. Now, you're saying you want the whole thing to be seen as a package, not elements cherry-picked. But are you happy with that constraint on your ability to hire informal workers, limited and reduced to just 5%?
Also, I think it's important to figure out and understand there are many industries which have a cyclicality, like the textile industry, etc. They have a seasonality in their work. They need to be able to hire for the season, because there are people who are willing to do those jobs, but current regulation does not permit either the people or the companies. So I think we need to look at the whole thing a little bit holistically.
Let me put that to you. He's suggesting that your restrictions on hiring of informal labor through contractors doesn't take into account the specific demands of something like the textile industry, which only needs people for a seasonal time and not thereafter. For them, therefore, hiring through contractors in an informal manner is essential. Have you overlooked that? We haven't. In fact, our proposal pays special attention to that. The fact of the matter is, very often those who don't employ workers by the season, should not, use seasonality as an excuse. In fact, most of this industry we have in Gurgaon, the number of informal labor is about 4 to 5 times the number of formal laborers. And these are not seasonal or garment industries at all. So what are we talking about? Second, when you come to garment industries too, we do allow for seasonality, certainly. We also say... But then those would be contracted labor, and they'd exceed the 5%. They'd exceed the 5%. But in seasonal industry, we've said here that you of course will have contract labor, but you must hire them for a minimum of 180 days. If it goes beyond 180 days, it's 1 full year. But remember, even in garments,
Food processing I can understand, construction I can understand, but even in garments there are many industries, there are many units in the garment industry where it is not seasonal at all. Remember, when it is winter here, it's summer somewhere else.
Provided you're an exporter.
Of course.
But if you're not, what if you're manufacturing?
If you're not exporters, if winter in North India, summer in South India, it's not true at all that you must with seasonality. In fact, because of seasonality, what garment exporters often do is that they flog labor for 2 months overtime. They hardly get any sleep.
And that is what you're preventing.
And that is what we're trying to prevent.
You know, Mr. Dasgupta, I'm coming back to you. To balance the hire and fire, there are a lot of elements in Dipankar Gupta's paper that improve working conditions, improve payment, reduce informalization of labor, and then there's one more which we haven't discussed and I want to bring into the conversation. He is suggesting workers' councils in every single enterprise regardless of its size, and secondly, workers' representation on the company board where the workers themselves will elect their representative, and that representative will be equal to every other member of the board. Now that is completely new. It doesn't exist in India. Does that make the whole package as a whole more acceptable?
It is a figment of imagination. If a worker is there on the board, he cannot prevent and he cannot oppose. He cannot go against the managing director or the chairman or anybody. Nobody is equal there. It is unequal. Therefore, it is not going to serve any purpose at all. But formation of a workers' council on the basis of election is a welcome step. But remember at the same time that the registered trade unions, they also have a role to play. If the elected council is a replacement of the trade unions, then that will not do any good to the workers.
Okay. On that specific point, Sunil Munjal, of the workers electing a representative who then is a full-fledged member of a company board equal in power and authority to any other member, how do you as an industrialist respond to the idea? Would you welcome it or would you have second thoughts about it?
So just let me go back a little bit to what you were saying earlier. One is that the outside unions in India have not really played a positive role for a very long time. Many of them come in only on a negative approach. Actually, unions, by the way, can be very useful if they act as a good bridge for communication between the workforce and the companies and the management. It can be a very, very positive way to help improve the environment and get better communication both ends. Because both have need to communicate, both need to work together, and which I think is the reason that Dipankar Gupta is suggesting workers' councils from inside the company and not from outside. Coming to the issue of board members, I think having representative on the board from the workers may actually be a good idea. I don't know what Mr. Gupta is saying, that it may or may not be equal. I think it may be a good idea. I've not really thought about this, but on the face of it, it sounds like an interesting idea to think about, I think.
But would you be happy for that worker representative to be the equivalent in terms of power and authority as any other member of the board?
All board members in today's regulation have equal power and authority. Somebody may be doing different roles in the sense of being part of an audit committee, or being part of a compensation committee or nomination committee, but as members they're all equal members.
You know, you're in a very interesting position.
The regulation has become, as you know, because of the new Companies Act, the regulation on how companies govern themselves is pretty stiff right now.
All right. Once again, you're in an interesting position. Your idea that there should be a full-fledged workers' representative elected by the workers on the board has been scoffed at by Mr. Dasgupta, one of India's largest trade unionists, but actually welcomed by Sunil Munjal. Do you find it odd that, in fact, the very people who should see benefit are scoffing at it, and the people who perhaps would have been a bit skeptical are welcoming it?
Well, yes, it's good and bad. I think Mr. Dasgupta is weighed by the past. There have been all the history of trade unions, history of positional hostility, workers against entrepreneurs or management, and this has been the way it has been for decades, which is why Mr. Dasgupta reacted the way he did. I don't think the Workers' Council is against trade unions. Trade unions allowed within a unit enterprise, but there will be one Workers' Council that will represent workers' interest to the management. Second, I'm glad Sunil has said what he said about welcoming a worker in the board, because you see, at the end of the day, as a friend of mine, a very senior member of the corporate world suggested to me, at the end of the day, the management must take the first step forward in bringing about a greater degree of trust and understanding between workers and management.
The onus is on management.
The onus is on the management.
Only then will workers respond.
Yes.
What about that point, and this may well be the last issue that I raise, Mr. Das Gupta, what's been said about your general overall attitude by Dipankar Gupta is that you may be lost in time, that you may be several decades behind the need of the day, that perhaps you need to update your thinking, and if you don't, the workers you represent may be the ones who pay the price.
I'm ready to discuss and take into consideration the suggestions made by Mr. Gupta. The Worker Council is a novel idea, and the point that he is making, that if a worker is fired, he must be given compensation along with his specific dues that he is entitled to. It is a good sense that he is making, but the world is not like that. Therefore, it is a step forward.
Okay.
I think it is a step forward.
I think.
But the fact of the matter is that, just 1 minute, but the fact of the matter is that all the countrywide situation is absolutely hostility, and hostility of the management toward the workers.
But that
workers are not hostile.
That Mr. Das Gupta, is the whole object of this paper to change. I'm going to stop you there, because you've actually now somewhat altered the position you seemed to be taking. I'm underlining the word seemed earlier on. You're now welcoming, in fact, Dipankar Gupta's proposals. You're even accepting the idea of hire and fire along with proper compensation as a step forward, but you doubt whether the government will implement his idea the way he's suggesting it, and that, of course, no one can guarantee. It's a proposal for the government. We've ended with a situation that's very interesting. No longer are there those sharp differences between Mr. Das Gupta and Sunil Munjal. They're converging on many points. They really want an assurance that if these proposals are accepted, they'll be accepted as full as a package, not cherry-picked. That's the important thing. A quick answer. Can you ensure that the government will accept this, if it does, in full, and not pick its little bits?
Well, I can't ensure that, but if it picks parts of it and lets the rest lapse, then I think the whole object will be lost.
All right.
The whole thing should be taken together, from Workers' Council to the denial of all thresholds.
Let's hope the Labour Minister is listening, and let's hope this time he pays heed to you.
One last point, there should be severe penalty for those who go against the law.
By which you mean severe penalty for those also who don't take your advice. The smile on your face seems to suggest it. My thanks to you for coming to studio and sharing your paper with us. My thanks also to Sunil Munjal and Guru Das Gupta. And I'm sorry that we didn't manage to get through to Rajiv Kumar. I'm afraid we seem to have had a problem there. There we end this particular episode. Goodbye. Good night.